And we bow and we bend from the beginning of the world till the never end. O Devo Shalom Aleinu, O Devo Shalom Aleinu, Devo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam.
All right, Neil.
Okay.
Welcome to Neil Comess-Daniels, our rabbi in residence.
Isn't this great? Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here, and I fell in love with teaching so many years ago, so I am so excited to do this. This is a real new launch for me, and I hope for you as well. So, always like to start with music. This is an old, what we call in our tradition a nigun. It's just a melody. It's all it is. Never had any words, and you can feel any way you want to about it. Ya la la ya ya ya, ya 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 la. Ya la la ya ya ya, la la, ya la la ya ya, la 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 ya ya ya, ma na ya ya ya, ya 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 ya, la la, la la ya ya ya, la la ya, la la, na na ya ya, ya 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 ya, la la, la la ya ya, and la la ya ya la, la la ya 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 ya. La 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 la, ya la ya la la ya la, ya la la ya ya ya, na ya 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 la, la 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 la, na ya na ya ya, ya na ya ya ya, ya la la ya ya ya, na ya 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 la la, ya la la ya ya. Okay, so when I usually do this class, I usually have 2 hours instead of 1. So we're going to see how well we do with this. And I'm going to try and consolidate everything the best I can. And of course, I usually have a whiteboard next to me, and I can write things and I can interact, and you can interrupt me. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do that. So I titled this first session, Judaism as a Civilization. So I'd like, first of all, I want to thank Max Diamond for helping to officiate with this class. So thank you. Why don't you put up the first slide? Here it comes, here it comes, here it comes. There it is. Nope, that's the second one. Go back. Yeah. Okay. Judaism is not a religion, a creed, a race, an ethnicity, a nation, a tribe, a community, a culture. I could go on and on. Next slide. Only Judaism is a civilization. It's all of them. We have music, we have dance, we have artwork, we have poetry, we have prayers like many other cultures do. We have holy texts. We have lots and lots and lots of commentary. We have all kinds of things, and we have, and by the way, I just want you to know that Judaism is not it's not a race because of two things. First of all, you will see Jews all over the world looking very, very differently from each other. Moses was a lot darker than I am and had hair that was much kinkier than mine. And Jesus probably did too, because of where they were in the world. But what's important to know also is there's nothing genetic about us. There's nothing genetic about us at all. Because first of all, again, you find Jews all over the world. Secondly, no one could convert to Judaism if it was in your bloodstream somehow. So let's go on to the next slide. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so this is our it's sort of a welcoming prayer, I guess you would say. We welcome new occasions with this, and this prayer will give us a lot to talk about, but it's also going to give us I hope a very good feeling. Um, so one thing that some of you may know, you may have heard, I don't know, is that we do have a prayer formula. And traditionally it begins with these words, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, which literally means we praise you. Eternal could be our God. Sovereign could be king. It really is the word king. Um, and then the next word is ha'olam, and it can mean the world, or it can mean the universe. It's it's kind of both, because in the ancient world, the world was the universe. And now we know it's much more, and we feel it as much more. But the rabbis, even before there was the science to demonstrate this, certainly had poetic ruminations about it, so that they could explore things in their minds and in their hearts. So technically it says, we praise you, eternal our God, sovereign of the universe, for giving us life, for sustaining us, and for enabling us to reach this season or this time. And what is important about that is that um, we do say it, of course, at a new year. So there's a new year, there's another one, there's another one. It depends what's significant to you in your life and how you mark time in your own life. There are people who, I don't know, who are in AA, who have a second birthday, right? They have the birthday of their sobriety, as well as their physical birthday. There are people in the LGBTQ community who have their before they were out, after they were out birthday, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We, of course, as a Jewish people, have holidays and holy days that we mark with this blessing, not a blessing like this, not a blessing attuned to this, but this blessing. We always use it. And one of the things that links Jews around the world is that we say the same words all the time. Our prayer book is set, and our liturgy is set. And when we do a moment like this, when we grab this moment, uh, that is something that we can do, at standard times. But also, if you haven't seen someone for a long time, you can also hopefully one day grab them and hug them and say, Shehechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. We are, I am in awe and wonder for whatever it is that caused us to come back together, and gain our feet underneath our lives again. So let's go to the next slide, because these are some things that we want you to know for this evening. The first thing is the term bracha, which means blessing. And Max, would you flip back to the one before, just so that I can demonstrate something? So the first word is, can you see this when I do this? Or not? Does Max have to do it? I'm a co-host, you can see it, right? Somebody shake their head if they can see it. Not getting very much. Okay. So this word Baruch, and then we go back to the other one, the one after this, Max. Bracha, you can hear the b and the and the ch in there. Actually, if you break that down, it's the word berech, which means knee, because just like some people still do, Jews used to pray on their knees. And why do people get on their knees to pray? It is to demonstrate humility. And not only that, but it's to demonstrate the seniority of someone that you are on your knees in front of. I saw an episode of something on the Nature Channel once, and it was about a pack of wolves, and they demonstrated exactly how it works with the alpha wolf and the beta wolves in the pack. And the beta wolves actually crouch down on their knees, crawl in front of the alpha wolf, and turn their heads this way to bare their neck to the alpha wolf, demonstrating that you can kill me if you want to because you're the alpha wolf. Now, it's not that extreme within prayer, but there are actually hieroglyphics of people being on their knees and their hands out like this, because this is open and this is closed, or it was in the ancient world at any rate. Yes? Okay. And we are going to talk about Bereshit, which either means in the beginning or in a beginning. That's the first word of the Bible in Hebrew, Bereshit. And it can be translated both ways, and they both mean something else. So the Shehachianu is the name of the prayer that we just said, because the first significant word that's different than Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam, praised are you, eternal, our God, King of the universe, sovereign of the universe. The first significant word is Shehecheyanu. Some of you may know that the word Chai, it means life in Hebrew. It's a very significant word for us, and it's right tucked in there in Shehecheyanu, right there, Shehecheyanu, okay? So literally, God who has kept us alive, a blessing for all kinds of beginnings, happy occasions, candle lighting, Kiddush, which is the toast, really, that we do for Shabbat and for holidays, and at certain other specific times during festival observance as well. But like I said, when somebody turns 10 years old, you can say Shehechianu. When somebody turns 80 years old, you can say Shehechianu. When you buy something new, you can say Shehechianu, except for leather, because in order for you to have leather, an animal had to die, and so we don't rejoice in a moment like that. So before we continue, I want to look at this word bracha again up at the top. This is the word for blessing, and I think we have some different notions of blessing between us, and I wanted to sort of explain the difference. Initially, what I would say is that in common parlance, as it were, the default understanding of blessing is that a blessing is something that one bestows upon someone else, or one receives from an unknown source or a divine source. I feel blessed. I bless you, right? When somebody sneezes, you say, bless you. That, by the way, in case you don't know, comes from a medieval superstition that people literally thought your soul escaped from you when you sneezed, and so if someone was there to say bless you, it came back in. And of course, it's horrible if you really believe that and you are in the middle of the forest and there's no one there. But what a blessing is within Judaism is an opportunity to grab a moment. And that's why this Shehechianu prayer is so significant, because what it does, both formally for holy days and holidays, but also for just a wonderful occasion that you have stumbled upon or stumbled upon you, then you grab the moment as if you could grab a moment before it flees into the future. You grab the moment with a blessing, with a bracha. And it actually is the tradition of Orthodox Jews, certainly Hasidic Jews, to try and say 100 blessings each day. And what does that do? That separates that moment from it's like separating the wheat from the chaff, right? It elevates that moment and makes it not mundane anymore, but something holy, something sacred, something that makes us feel different. So when we do a blessing, nothing changes outside of us. The only thing that changes is us. The only thing that changes is our attitude towards what we're doing. Um, uh, I'll give you an example. In a moment, you'll see a whole series of blessings that we can say at various times. And once again, these blessings are set. If a Jew is eating an apple in India, or a Jew is eating an apple in Michigan, they will be saying the same blessing. And that's something that really takes us and puts us together as a Jewish people, because we are a tribe and we are a nation. Um, but we're not necessarily a nation that, certainly for 2,000 years, we were homeless. Since the temple was destroyed by the Romans until the state of Israel was resurrected, to use a mixed metaphor, in 1948, when that happened and the new modern state of Israel was created, we had been without a home for 2,000 years. And so we definitely had our civilization, and we definitely had our connecting sinews that kept us together. And part of it was saying these blessings in the same way anywhere we were in any one of those generations. So a blessing grabs a moment. If I was going to eat, I don't know, a carrot out of the ground, we're not going to get to that blessing, but uh, that is a blessing that specifically it gives thanks for things that grow out of the ground. It's not anything else, just things that grow out of the ground. So it's not the same blessing that you would say for a piece of fruit. It's not the same blessing that you would certainly say for bread, which is, one of the considered a major blessing, because a meal with bread is considered to be a full meal, which teaches you also how hungry people can be in the world and how appreciative you need to be when you have bread as part of your meal. It is, it is not a blessing for an occasion. It's just a carrot, but it's not just a carrot. Because when you take the carrot out of the ground and you're just about to eat it, and you stop and you say, wow, this is a carrot. I'm about to eat this carrot, and it's good for me, and it grows right out of the ground, and I'm completely overwhelmed by this. And all of that gets held in this blessing that starts off with the word Baruch, which slams you on your knees, metaphorically, and says, I am in awe, I am in wonder that there are carrots in the world that I can consume for my own sustenance, and have the wonderful sensation of a tactile sensation, in my mouth, and a flavorful sensation in my mouth. And it may not be the same as it is for anybody else, but I appreciate it, because there are people in the world who don't like carrots, and I do. And I know what it tastes like to me, and I have no idea what it tastes like to anyone else. And it's so amazing that it's here. And you say that blessing. Okay, so Bereshit we'll get back to in a little bit. In the beginning. Let's go to the next one. All right, so here comes our blessings for various occasions. So some of you may know that we have, and you may have heard this blessing before, because in interfaith settings, when a Jew is called upon to bless the meal, more than likely that meal is going to have bread, and we can say the blessing over bread, which from our perspective, because bread is so much representative of sustenance, that it it's an umbrella. It embraces all the different kinds of foods that we eat. However, if we're just eating an isolated kind of fruit, like of food, this is the blessing I use for my cereal in the morning. It's cereal, it's milk. It may have fruit in it, but those fruit sometimes comes from various different places uh, in the world, as it were. Not from the ground, not from a bush, uh, not from a tree. Right? It could be any of those. And so we say the creator of many kinds of food, Borei Minei Mizonot. Orthodox Jews will do this too, over a glass of water. A glass of water, there's a blessing, and this is the blessing. Many kinds of food, right? My interpretation of the blessing is we are in awe and wonder before and within the oneness. It should be the oneness of all, not the oneness of call, that creates many kinds of foods, okay? You may learn through this process that I may use the word Adonai for God. I may not use the word or eternal. I may use that. I'm going to use oneness a lot. And I'm not going to use God very much because I think that there are too many connotations with God. And so I'll teach you about Adonai as we go through, which is, as best as I can describe it, it is itself a description. It's a description of what we mean by God when we say that word. It is not a name. The Jewish people really don't have a name for God. It would be much different if we did, and we don't. We have an understanding. We have an understanding about God's unity, about God's oneness, and that God is intricate and immediate in everything. I think one of the best ways to describe the word Adonai perhaps could be with this. I think I've mentioned this before to you already. It's only been a short time, but I think I might have mentioned this. And it is a Hasidic notion. Hasidic Judaism, by the way, was a Judaism that took flight in the latter part of the 18th century. And essentially gave Jews permission to rely on passion rather than structure, because there were so many people in the world who didn't know the traditional prayers, who didn't know exactly what you're supposed to say when, that they were given permission to be passionate, and even make up their own prayers, their own music, and the Hasids would tell stories to get things to be understood. Or they use little metaphors like this one. The world is God with clothes on. Again, the world is God with clothes on, meaning that there doesn't need to be a physical manifestation of God. There is one. We're in it. We're part of it. We are essential to it. And everything else, like that carrot, is essential to it. And in many, many ways, we are exactly the same. There, how much we are essential is the same for every grain and every molecule. It doesn't matter. We're all in this together. It won't be long before I will be the carrot. And when I consume the carrot is part of me. And so all of that is our porous nature in which we absorb and are part of this one. You may know, we'll go over this later when we do a little liturgy, but more than this. But one of the things that you may know is that the main prayer of a Jewish service is called the Shema, which is not really a prayer at all. It was a pronouncement by Moses to the people declaring that God is one. And that is crucial to our understanding. No matter what you think about God, and no matter how you think about God, um, God cannot be bifurcated in any way or split in any way. God is God. Everything is God. We work at unifying God because it looks like God is different and in different parts. When we see ourselves as individuals, when we see ourselves as individuated and others as individuated, but in reality, we're not. Um, uh, one of the things that we're missing right now because of this terrible crisis that we're in is that chemical exchange that goes on between people. We don't have that now. And I do firmly believe that our bodies are starving for it. And even that interaction with, going to the market and picking up I don't know, a grapefruit and, smelling the grapefruit and so on and so forth, and the tactile feeling of picking it out on your own rather than, having someone else do it. Okay, Max, go to the next one. Okay, so we did our different kinds of foods. This works for, all kinds of things. Notice that it says other than bread, fruits, or vegetables, and over liquids other than wine, right? Okay, so that's what this one is for. Please go to the next one. Okay, I should have done this on the slide. I'd rather change the blessing to the word, the English word, over to the word with. We are taking an opportunity for saying a blessing with this fruit that grows from trees, with the fruit that grows from trees. So what are we saying when we have this piece of fruit in us, in our hand before it comes into us? We are giving thanks that there are different kinds of fruit, first of all, and that trees give us so much besides fruit, but they also give us something that can recreate itself. If you remember a little bit of your Bible from the beginning of the book of Genesis, it's very important, and it's not taken lightly, that everything was made in its kind with a seed inside. With the seed inside, and the seed can reproduce what was, and it's amazing. How many seeds there are in an apple tells you how difficult it is to grow another apple tree in the wild. And that's something that we should notice as well. And there are different kinds of apples. And apples are probably not what Adam and Eve ate in the garden, because there aren't any in Israel. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay, my dog is behind me and he hates lightning and thunder. But we're going to say this blessing anyway. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam osem ma'aseh v'reshit. So this is really interesting, that when you see lightning or other natural wonders, I don't know, geyser, a huge wave crashing, tides rolling in and rolling out, all those kinds of things, right? When you stare long enough at a flower or something to notice more and more about it, you could say this one too. Natural wonders of the universe that we often pass by. Some of them make us notice them, like lightning and thunder. Other ones are more subtle, and we have to grab those as well. So we're using, we're using the impact, the emotional impact of lightning and thunder to remember the power of creation. When I really do my physical workout, what I like to do is swim, which I can't do right now, although I do know some people who are using the ocean, as long as they can find a beach that's open. And the ocean swimming is very different, obviously, than a pool, because there's so much going on in the ocean. And you know that when you walk into the water, into the ocean, you feel the power of the universe, and you feel the tug of the universe. And that's what this blessing is about. This blessing is take a moment when you walk into that water and you feel the tide pulling at you, or you feel some current pulling at you. Feel it, acknowledge it, and say a blessing. Grab the moment and say, this is amazing that I'm part of this. Next one, please. So here's one specifically for seeing the ocean, okay? And it is, now this is the exact phrasing, right? Who made the great sea, okay? Who made the great sea? Why just one sea? Why not all of them? Because this is a very ancient blessing. And for most of the people who were going to see, if they ever saw an ocean, it was only going to be one. And that's all they knew. So the Great Sea. For me, it's about more. It's about the life-giving waters of the sea. But I'm looking at it differently than my ancestors did. I'm looking at it in terms of all the seas that I know of, and all the things that water does, and all the things that we know, especially here in California, when water isn't as plentiful as we'd like it to be. Okay, next blessing. Next, thank you. Okay, so this is an interesting one. Upon recovery from serious illness or upon escape from danger. So again, this is not over. We're not saying a blessing over this moment. We're saying a blessing with what occurred, with the disease that we're not experiencing now, with the danger that we're not in now. It's essentially a blessing about differentiation, and really being very appreciative for the multitude of calm and pleasant moments that most of us have in our lives. And we are so fortunate to experience that. And with the world being as small as it is now, we know how lucky we are to be in Santa Monica, West LA, or wherever people are going to view this from in the future. Most places, people are, in many places, certainly the people who can plug into a computer and view this video later or see it now. We're very lucky. We're very, very lucky. And obviously we're all in danger all the time. But when you have really been in danger and you know it, and others around you have known it, and then you're not in danger anymore, then you say this blessing, which Gamalani Kol Tov, that God has bestowed me, bequested me, granted me, honored me with good things, with everything good. That's what Kol Tov means, everything good. And by the way, if, just parenthetically almost, if God is one, then God isn't also what's Kol Tov, what is all good. God also was the disease that you suffered through, or the danger that you suffered through, and now are experiencing the good. And it also doesn't mean that you can't know the good without the bad. It doesn't mean that at all. And that's not why there are the experiences that we have in our lives that aren't very pleasant. They happen because they happen. They happen because they're part of the makeup of this world and the personality of this world. But when we do experience a moment of goodness, and I think what it might be called in Christianity would be a moment of grace. When we feel that, whatever its source, we express our gratitude. And that's what this blessing is. It's grabbing the moment and saying thank you. Okay, next one. So before we mention, and this will be the last thing we do before we take questions, because I have a funny feeling there'll be a lot, and I noticed some things were coming up on the chat, but I can't see anything because without my glasses, so I'm not going to look at that. This is large enough for me to see. Try not to look at the second version before you look at the first version. This one, you know. This is Bereshit. This is the book of Genesis. That's what we call the book of Genesis because it starts with the word Bereshit, which is usually translated in the beginning. God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Now let's look at this text, which is translated from the Masoretic text. The Masoretes were the ones who actually, they were grammarians, is really what they were. And they developed a Hebrew that people could access because after a while, people couldn't read words without vowels out of context or even in context. And so they created vowels, a whole vowel system that used to be memorized that people could now read. And they also created this text of the Bible that is, in Hebrew, our standard. And this is the Jewish Publications translation. I'm going to do it a little bit differently. We can talk about it for a moment. When God began to create the heaven and the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Okay, I'm going to start with the easy part first. The part that is exactly the same in the two texts. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now, as a modern 2020 person who goes to a doctor and relies on plastic being made in a factory and machinery being made or boxes being specially formed that can fit your product in it and whatever. All of those things are were unknown to our ancestors. So when God says, "Let there be light," there's a problem. The problem is that there's no source for the light. The moon and the sun don't get created for a couple of days. Because in the ancient world, light and the sources thereof were different things, which is marvelously poetic for us. And, if we didn't have all the knowledge that we have, maybe we too could see it that way. In fact, there's a blessing in the morning that is a gratitude blessing for light that we say in the morning, and it gives thanks for the lights of light, right? The many lights that come from wherever light comes from. Again, in the ancient world, it wasn't necessarily the sources. The luminaries, the moon and the sun and the stars. So that's fascinating right off the bat. But there's a difference between in the beginning and when God began to create. And you can see that in the beginning is a definitive start. It's, if you have a timeline, the timeline begins right there, in the beginning. My colleagues who translated the Masoretic text into this Hebrew decided to use the word "when," which isn't even in the Hebrew, by the way. It's not in the Hebrew. But they're trying to reflect something. When God began to create the heaven and the earth indicates a continuum, not a definitive start, which immediately started my ancient colleagues thinking about, well, what happened before? What happened before this beginning of the heaven and the earth? Was there anything thereafter? Will there be anything after this? And of course, they speculated and wrote beautiful commentaries and so on, which, by the way, are, as you will hear me say as part of my sermon this Sunday, all of their interpretations are right, even though they're very different and disagree with each other. They're all right within Jewish tradition, and we hold them all equally as in equal value. The earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and it does say deep, and it does say darkness. It does say the earth is unformed and void, but it doesn't say it's not there. So already what we're looking at in this text, both the King James and the JPS, is that when God began to create this world, there were things already, which gave the rabbis more fuel for thought about what was before. There was something there that was there, but unformed and void. There was darkness, which is, to the ancient mind, something. There was a deep what we don't know. And then there is a big controversy in the text, a big split between the Christian translation and the Jewish translation. And by the way, anytime you read the translation, you have to know its commentary already, right? Chaim Nachman Bialik, one of the great literary giants of Israel, said that reading something in translation is like kissing somebody through a handkerchief. You sort of get the idea of what you're doing, but you're not really doing it. So, or today you consider through a mask. Translations have to be commentary, because when you move from one language to another, everything gets nuanced. Definitely, the word ruach, which is translated in the King James Version as spirit, can mean wind. It can mean spirit. It can, but it's not the core definition. The core definition is wind, and I think it's important that if we look in the context of what the text is saying, it's describing things in the world. There's unformed and void, there's darkness, there's deep, and there's wind. And they're all from God, sweeping over the water, which is also from God, or also is God. And then God said, let there be light, and there was light, and we'll worry about the luminaries in a day or two. Okay, that was a lot of stuff to begin with, so let's take some questions.
Question for you about the different sects, the Hasidic and the Reform and the different ones. I'm very interested in the consistency of the prayers. You said that there's a fixed order and or verbiage around the world.
Yeah.
But I was just interested in that. You mean that all these different sects don't have any emotions involved? They don't move the words around to fit the moment? They're only allowed to say a certain verse?
Oh, no. In fact, it was very interesting. So, one of my conversion candidates a long time ago, it was her personal custom every time an ambulance went by to say a prayer, to say that she hoped the people that they were going to were okay, right? Mm-hmm. And she resisted converting because she saw all this structured prayer, and she said, I guess I can't do that. But of course, we all do. And what ties us together as a community are these prayers. What ties us together as a people are these prayers. And I don't know if you ever saw the film or the play Fiddler on the Roof. And if you haven't, now that you're home, you might as well. But at the beginning, it's the beginning of the Sabbath day, and the matriarch of the main family, Golda, lights her Sabbath candles, and then you see one person over here doing it, one person there doing it, and they're all doing the same blessing. They all do the same blessing. Now, my mother, after she would light the candles, used to talk to her mother, who was long gone by then, in Yiddish. So all of a sudden she was breaking out in Yiddish, and she would, have her hands over here, and she'd be crying and talking to her mom, and then she was done. And I know that other people have, their traditions too about what they say to everybody around the table, and certainly what they say to their children, although there's a specific blessing for that as well. And it resonates within us. It really does. It's sort of like, being, in a foreign country and, hearing somebody say the Pledge of Allegiance all of a sudden. It hooks us together. Even though we interpret them differently. I'll give you that. Between, there's a big wide spectrum, and we're all Jewish in it.
Rabbi, when you were talking about the prayers and how the prayers are the same wherever you are.
Yeah.
One of the things that made me think of is what I think of when I take communion. That for me, that is, I'm at one with all the Christians around the world, with departed Christians, and while obviously there is some significant differences. I mean, communion is, it's kind of weird, and it's not just a prayer.
Right. It's a ritual.
It's a ritual, right? And that ritual is something that has become deeply important for me as we lose people, and I need to, or as we move away from people, and I need to feel connected with people who are no longer in church with me, or maybe even have left the church entirely.
I think that's a beautiful connection. It really is. When my synagogue first started, we started it in an Episcopal church, and I was invited to speak from the pulpit a couple of times, and I was up there as people engaged in the Eucharist, I guess is what they call it. Yeah. And you could see that, as much as it's supposed to be the transubstantiation of the body and the blood of Jesus, for them, they were transformed.
Yeah.
You could see their transformation. I didn't even have to ask them, right? Tell me how you feel. I could see it.
Yeah.
And for each person, it was different. And so that's why I say we may interpret the prayers a little bit differently, but we're all going to say the same ones, basically. And of course, I'm such a radical that I did change some of the prayers, and I'll talk about that with you too at some point. But that also did happen at certain points in Jewish history. We've been around for a long time, and Moses didn't know these prayers that we say.
Really?
Yeah. Okay. Right. And Jesus didn't know them either. A lot of them were developed. Much of it was developed after the first prayer book we have. It was all an oral tradition. The first prayer book written down that we had was the middle of the 9th century. So for Jews, that's late.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that your interpretation, Neil, of some of these prayers, especially that whole little prose poem you told us about the carrot and eating a carrot. It was so grounded in the moment and in the earth and in reality and in our own experience of everything. And to me, it just, that way of looking at the prayers and the way of looking at our spirit and our oneness and all the things around us and connecting back to the earth. And the idea that for the ancient people, the universe was the earth. And it just connects everything back up to the naturist religion And just I found that just a very compelling way of looking at it all.
Well, I'm going to use a term from your world since you're our yoga man at the moment. Yeah. Um,
Yes.
but, they're mindfulness tools.
Mm.
That's what the blessings are. They're mindfulness tools. They're ways to wake you up and connect you with, again, what I said earlier, what could be mundane, but you're lifting it up. You're making it more. Okay.
Cool.
We have about 5-7 minutes before we're going to stop the tape, just because if we go on beyond an hour, I'm afraid we'll lose people on watching.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything that you want to get in before we stop the tape in the next few minutes?
Okay, I'll tell you what. Let me do my translation of that first word of the Torah. Okay, Bereshit. So we had in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and we had when God began to create. I'm going to parse the Hebrew for you a little bit. Okay, so Bereshit. In that word is the word Rosh. You can sort of hear it, Bereshit, right? Rosh is head. It's a beginning. This is considered to be the beginning of our bodies in our ancient tradition, okay? So, and this is going to sound very, very subtle. The word the does not exist in Hebrew on its own. It is always, always, always attached to the word that it is defining. Okay, so that definitive article gets attached to the word. So if you were going to say the beginning, you would say ha reshit, the beginning. If you were going to combine that with the word in, which is the word, the letter b, which also gets glued onto the word, the ha and the b get connected, right? And it would be ba reshit. B connected, ba reshit, in the beginning. But it's not in the beginning. It's not definitive. It says literally in a beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Which beginning? And what does, what does that mean about the flow of reality and the flow of our universe? And one of my favorite books over the last few years was by Neil deGrasse Tyson, who you may know. He's a wonderful astronomer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. And the very beginning of the book is, takes us on the timeline of the creation, if we want to see it as this explosion, as this Big Bang, right? But before, of course, you had to have the Big Bang, right? You had to have the concentration of the material, right? And so he goes through all of these little steps all together, and by the time he gets to us, we're something like 3 hours into the universe or something, right? That we're not very long into it. Who knows what's happening now? I gave a sermon several years ago about Voyager. I think most of us here are old enough to remember Voyager and when it launched, right? That it went beyond the solar system and it kept going, right? And so that was the breadth of what the rabbis were looking at when they saw in a beginning. And what? That means it goes on infinity over here and infinity over there. Who knows how many beginnings there were before, and who knows how many beginnings there will be after us. And that's why we take a blessing to, an opportunity to use a blessing to grab a beginning. This is the first time I'm eating this carrot, right?
Yeah.
Or, when Passover comes every year, we say this blessing, not because, it's Passover again. No, it's this Passover. It's this year in this context. And this year it was very different. It was a Zoom context, you know. Hopefully, you know, the church won't be in that situation when it comes to Christmas, but you've had other things before that you haven't been able to do. You know, not as major as that, but Passover, as you'll see when we talk about it, is really pivotal to the Jewish calendar. Really pivotal.
Neil, you know, I think that's a good spot to stop the recording, because I think we've,
Okay.
you know, I mean, and we could go on a whole separate class about science then, couldn't we? I mean, that's where I went right away. I mean, my friend Claire Burkett, Bishop of Philadelphia, used to talk about God of the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
She's saying there are other solar systems, there are other Earths, but there's one God of all of them. I mean,
That's right.
You know, but so thank you, Neil, for the first class. For those of you watching this on YouTube, you're going to miss a little more discussion, and you know, but tune in next week for more.
Yavo shalom aleinu, Yavo shalom aleinu ve'al kulam, Yavo shalom.